This is the ClePunk podcast. This is dedicated to the Cleveland punk scene, a scene that planted its flag in the 1970s, and that flag still stands today. You'll hear from the bands, the characters, the contributors, the lake rats, the gypsies of the Dead Man's Curve, and the dwellers of the East, West, and South Side. We let them tell the story like it isn't like it was. There's no holding back. What it was ClePunk. So today I'm with Robert Griffin, and it would take 20 minutes to read his vitae regarding his contributions to the music industry. So let me just cut to the chase. He's been involved in music since he was about 15 years old. I know for over 30 years he's been the owner and runs Scat Records, and he's a real gifted guitar player. I just kind of discovered your bass playing because I never really knew much about Spike and Vane.
Right.
But, you know, it was, and he was a great songwriter, went on to play in other bands and wasn't just one of the best in Cleveland, but to me he was one of the best in the whole underground punk scene. So, Robert, how are you doing?
I'm real well. Thank you.
That's awesome. So before we talk about the record, the new record that's coming out, before you were in Spike and Vane, you were in the Dark, and how did that project end, and how did you get to be involved with Chris and Andrew Merrick and Bruce Allen in Spike and Vane?
There was actually an overlap. Like, I joined Spike and Vane in the fall of 1982 and had already been doing the Dark for about a year at that point. And the Dark continued through spring of 84. So, like, here's the Dark and here's Spike and Vane, and there's a, good year and a half where I was playing in both bands. Right in the fall of 82, maybe even earlier, Tom Dark somehow convinced the Merricks to let the Dark practice in their basement. And we started doing that and just hanging out. There were changes in Spike and Vane, which didn't have that name yet. They were called the Blanks. But not written out, just, a line with a question mark and an S. That was their name. So Adam Araka, who was actually the older brother of David Araka, the drummer in The Dark, he was playing with those guys. And he and Bruce, who wound up being the drummer in Spike and Vane, but at that time was switching off and on between bass and guitar, they were going to really start to focus on their more like proggy trio thing they had going. So Adam was out, and then Andrew was like, well, Bruce is a great drummer too, and he's willing to keep playing, so maybe you could jump in and help us out. And at first I was mostly playing bass the first few songs we learned, and just Andrew and Chris were switching off between guitar and vocals. And then very quickly, it started being a very equal thing, like all of us doing all those instruments for approximately the same amount of time in any given set.
Yeah,
so
you can tell that.
It was mostly just a result of being around at the Merrick's house. It just sort of become like, the central hang for all us Shaker kids. But there were these different generations, like Chris and Bruce and those guys who graduated a couple of years before. Andrew and I were still in high school, and that's how I initially met those guys. Was Andrew and I shared 2 classes and just pegged each other as the only 2 weirdos in those classes, and didn't live that far apart. Started walking home from school and talking about shit. And
what year was this?
This was 82, but earlier in the year. And the Dark played at the Pop Shop sometime in the spring or early summer, and all those guys came down to see us because Andrew was freaked out because we were all so much younger for the most part. Like, you guys are playing in a bar? Like, no way. Okay, we'll go. They were not impressed at all. Like, Andrew literally said to me after the show, like, wow, I didn't know such a shitty band could get a gig. So gives me all kinds of hope for my band. Like, if you guys can get a show, I'm sure we can. But, you know, what he meant was not so much that we were shitty, is that, you know, we were fucking punk rock, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't really his thing. So he looked at what we were doing as just being super basic, you know? Like,
No kidding.
what's exceptional about that other than you guys are all really young? So that
I didn't know
was,
you guys were still that young in '82. Jeez.
Yeah, I
thought
mean,
you-
in '82, I gotta do math here, 15, 16, you know.
No shit.
Yeah.
Man, you're way younger than me. Damn.
Yeah, and
All right.
in the dark, you know, Scott and David, the rhythm section, they were 13.
Yeah, I remember they were
and
young.
looked at, like, their voices hadn't even changed yet.
No, you guys. I remember you before I left the Cleveland area in '81.
You
It
would
was
have
just
seen
about
the very
when you were.
first Dark show because
Yeah.
it was down at Tucky's. That was our first show.
Yeah, there you go. So, well, that's good history of it. So, tell me about the record. What you got coming out? That's the Spike and Vein release, and how it's, you know, the format, where it's being distributed, and all that.
Right. It's called Jesus Was Born in a Mobile Home. It's an Iggy reference because Iggy was born in a mobile home, and we all really liked the Stooges. So it was just a tape. So we thought, yeah, that's a good enough title. That's fine. And that original tape release was supposed to be our follow up to the first album. And basically, before we had even recorded enough songs for it to be an album, Bruce split the band for good, and we didn't really know what to do with the stuff. So we finished up the songs that were okay. There was one that was too sloppy to include. That's a bonus track digitally for this. And threw on some other random shit we had on tapes and just put it out as a cassette and started over. But I started thinking about doing a vinyl version of it after reissuing the first album last year, and I also put out the unreleased second album, Death Drives a Cadillac. And those both, I couldn't say what the time frame was, but in short order, they both sold out. And I thought, oh, well, people want Spike and Vein shit, so I've got tons of other stuff. I mean, we could have done, if we'd recorded every song we ever did, it's like 5 albums worth of material. Because every single time we got together, we learned at least 1 or 2 new songs. Because with 3 of us writing, like, it was almost a competition who could write the most songs. It was ridiculous. So, you know, given the success of those initial reissues, it made sense to me, like, okay, at some point I need to get those recordings out and the best of everything else that is just, you know, rotting away on cassettes. So that was the genesis of it, and it took about 14 months for the albums to actually be pressed, and now they're here, and it'll be out January 20th.
What's all the delays about? Just everybody pressing vinyl these days?
There's so much demand, and the majors don't have their own plants, so they tend to gum up the whole system. You know, they'll carve out.
Because they're.
If they have a big release like Adele or whatever, you know, they're going to carve out a week or two at 20 different plants all over the world. And, yeah, it's supply chain, pandemic shit is still an issue. Everything's costing more. Paper shortages. Only one place on the entire planet that makes blank lacquers that you actually cut the masters into.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just taken a long time.
Well, it's here. Pretty soon, right? When's the release date?
Yeah, January 20th.
Cool. And how's it going to be distributed? Vinyl, electronically, digitally?
Yes,
CD,
vinyl
or...
and digital. It can all be pre-ordered now, either on our website, realscatrecords.com, or on Bandcamp. And like I mentioned, the Bandcamp digital download does include 3 bonus tracks that either just physically could not be cut to vinyl, like that outtake from the sessions with Bruce that I mentioned that we didn't put on the cassette. That's an early version of Big Black Locomotive. And then there's, what's the other one? Part of a Michael Landon, but there are no vocals, and the recording I have of it just starts in the middle of the song. So, what else? Oh, a rough mix of Winter's Black Hand, which if I had had it before I had sent it off, I would have used that rather than the mix we put on the record. But they're both good. So just a little something extra for the Bandcamp people because they're super supportive and great.
Do you distribute through Spotify and Apple Music and all of that?
All the major platforms, even like Qobuz or Qobuz. Yeah. I don't know how you say it, the high-end one.
Right.
And they actually, good information, have the highest payouts to labels. So definitely like that.
0.00004 cents a play.
But regardless of where people buy it, it doesn't really matter in the end for me. I'm just
it's
people engage with it. However, it's up to them.
That's the thing. It's Spotify and all those services. A lot of musicians rebelled against it, and I was always into it from the beginning because I worked in record stores. The record industry's been screwing musicians for 1,000 years.
Yeah,
and
same
it's
old
like
story.
And now it's distribution. It's like, why not? You'd never be able to get your records to Ireland or your songs to Spain or wherever, Oklahoma for that matter. And now you can. So. I don't know. I mean, I don't mix about it. I use Spotify probably more than anything else, but it's good that you distribute through that,
Yeah.
It's exposure, and that's what helps. But
sure.
I'm going to preview some tracks that we're going to play, and let's first listen to the opening track on the record. It's called Little Voice That Betrays, and if I'm not mistaken, it says that it was recorded at Island Studios in early '84.
That's right.
Had Chris Merrick, who wrote the lyrics, and he provided the vocals. Andrew Merrick played guitar, right? And he wrote music. Yeah. You were on the bass, Robert, and Bruce Allen was on the drums. So let's give it a listen.
Right on.
Okay.
Little voice to betray says, everything's okay, it's down to hell. Somebody's out there.
So that was Little Voice That Betrays by Spike and Vane. And, Robert, I never saw a Spike and Vane show, but when I heard that opening track on the record, I thought, close your fucking eyes and picture it live, right? And that song, like a lot of the others on the release, just takes you to a spot in time where you're in that venue that smells like cigarettes and beer and sweat,
Yeah.
And there's 5 bands on the fucking bill, and your ears are going to be ringing for days, after the hangover's gone. But I really dig the song as a kickoff song. That echo feedback in the beginning is interesting. That might have been a little difficult back in the analog days to pull off. I don't know. Was that something to it, or because that came out spot on?
That was just sort of an accident. We were mixing the song, and if you're working in analog and somebody's adding effects to a track, like, some echo or reverb or whatever, they'll isolate it and it'll sound super saturated, and then you sit it into the mix and a lot of it disappears, and, your objective is achieved. But we were sitting around listening to him do this, and Andrew and Scott Lash, who was heavily involved with all the recordings and financed most of them, we were sitting listening to it. We're like, oh, that's fucking incredible. Why don't we just print that to tape, and we're going to splice that onto the beginning of the song after we mix it. And so that's what we did. So the song changed through the recording process of just, oh, wow, that makes a great introduction.
Yeah, no, that worked out, and like the rest of the record, the guitar and bass playing is just freaking spot on, and the tone of the guitar on the track is shit, man, it's so good. So was the whole band involved in production during the sessions, or how did those sessions normally go when y'all were in the studio?
Well, it was usually the basic tracks were cut pretty quickly, and we would do the vocals live too. But if any of those had issues sound-wise or performance-wise, we'd redo those, occasionally do a guitar overdub. And as time went on, we started getting a little more involved. But it was basically just a really low-key, yeah, that's fine, let's record the next one kind of deal. Like Disease is Relative, we recorded all the basic tracks in one day, I'm pretty sure. And most of the vocals are live. That record is 95% live. But especially I would credit Scott Lash, because he was sort of the bullshit detector in the room and had the highest standards. He was the guy who would take the cassette mixes that we did and listen to them on a boombox and a good stereo and in his car, and then come back and remix, like, we need to bring up the bass a little bit or change the frequency on this so there's a little more detail. The Jesus stuff, since we knew it was just coming out on cassette, we didn't take as much time on. Those were very quick, and Scott was not as rigorous about getting really good balanced mixes, because we're just putting it out on a tape. So even though it's recorded at the same studio as Disease is Relative, you can tell, like, we weren't trying as hard on the fidelity angle. Like, it's... a lot of the songs actually predate that album, and it also sometimes sounds like it was recorded before it. It's this weird, anomalous kind of thing.
What was that? Scott Godwin, you said at the Island Records? What did he have for a recording rig? Was it 4-track, 8-track, 12-track? What was he doing?
It was a half-inch 8-track, and it was in his basement. There was a live room in the half of the basement that was finished, and then he had a little tiny room for a control room and all kinds of crazy shit. Like, he had Taurus bass pedals and actual not chimes, bells, that you strike with a big mallet, and an organ and trombones and every percussion organ instrument you could imagine. But he was also like this old, like, mystical kind of hippie dude. Like, there were all sorts of ceremonial daggers on the property or hanging in the studio, and he had this black cat named Wizard, and there was just all this kind of mysterious, funky shit in his basement. I don't know what the house itself was like. We weren't allowed up there, but yeah, it seemed really appropriate. It was like, $15 an hour.
Oh, damn.
But
That was cheap.
you know, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but when we did the Disease is Relative reissue last year and I was listening to test pressings and stuff, it's like, this is actually a really good classic recording. It's pretty dry. It's really honest. And yeah, the frequency range is a little smushed because, you know, it's half-inch 8-track. You can only get so much low and high end on there, especially the low, but that's a really admirable recording. He did a great job.
Right. Yeah, it sounded good. I always think, I remember Gary Lupico and I once talking about the art to sequencing cuts on a record. Why was this one the first track?
That introduction, you know, it was a natural when we did the original cassette release and when I was sequencing the vinyl version, which is different in terms of the running order versus the tape, because there's like, you know, 15 extra tracks, so it didn't make sense to just tack those all on. Yeah, there was no argument. Like, from the second that track was done, we knew it was the first track.
So we just heard a mix of two versions of Ugly and Damaged by Spike and Vane, both on the new record. And the first was recorded live in January 1983 at the Knights of Columbus Hall in South Euclid. And the second is the studio cut recorded in the winter of 83 back at Island. And that one featured Andrew Merrick on vocals, and he wrote the lyrics. And Chris was on guitar, and he wrote the music. And Robert was on the bass, and Bruce Allen was on the drums. So this was the first song played at the first Spike and Vane show, the first one you learned, the band's manifesto, I heard you say. So
yes,
talk about that.
For sure. Like, you know, they brought me into the band, and I will never forget sitting in the Merrick's basement and Chris showing me that song just full of all these crazy blocky chords. And, you know, I was already sort of really doing everything I could with dissonance and chromaticism in my own writing, but that was just fucking next level. Plus, you know, the rhythms, and I don't think there are any actual time changes, but we had to really do some work to figure out how to all come in at the same time on certain parts or do the same thing. And that was what was great about having Bruce Allen as a drummer, because he had enough musical education that he could listen to something crazy Chris came up with and know immediately, like, oh, that's in 5/4, so you want to do this on the last beat and everything will be fine. But yeah, that song just blew my mind, and then Andrew's lyrics was reflected our whole like admiration for everything that was falling apart around us, you know, like we wanted the music to sound like it was self-destructing in the same way that Cleveland was, and environmental concerns of, you know, everything just fucking falling apart. Like, to us, entropy seemed to be the reigning principle of the universe, and we were seeing it in real time. And we had this song that perfectly expressed that whole thing in one big chunk. And so, you know, for a good amount of time early on in the band, like the measure of whether something was good or not was, is it ugly? Is it damaged? If the answer is yes to both of those, that's a Spike and Bane song. You know, and we gradually grew and got more, even more diverse. We started diverse and got more diverse, but even so, those are the guiding principles.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of tough to get an understanding of the lyrics that you guys wrote, you know, just reading through them, because it's a lot of dark shit, you know,
yeah.
it's just a lot of dark shit. And
but to us, it was fun. Like, our
well, that's the thing I was going to ask.
Like we were glorying in that. Like, we loved how terrible everything was. It brought us joy.
Well, yeah, you had to, I guess, you know. But, you know, and I know he refers to disease in the song, and you do, and You're Gonna Watch Me. You guys both use it. I mean, is that just coincidental, or is it a context? You talked about damage. I mean, it seems like...
Yeah, I'm sure if you did a Spike and Main word cloud, disease, decay would be words that would be in 20, 30-point type.
Exactly. How would you describe the lyrical mood of the band? I mean, there's definitely a lyrical mood, right? I mean, there's definitely one.
Yeah, I think and we were all readers, and the two Merricks especially were huge Lovecraft fans. And, you know, other horror writers, Robert Bloch, and names are escaping me right now, but that's one of the early things we bonded over. But also, you know, the Beats, we were all reading Burroughs, and just that's all coming in, and we're filtering it through our little thing. And so that's, I think, why there's some consistency, even though we're all writing lyrics for different songs, that there is some relationship between them somehow, because we're all basically interested in the same thing.
Right. Now, I don't know if this is an odd question, but I've known some of the other guys you've been in bands with. So did you guys joke around at practice? I mean, read Mad Magazine and watch Indians games and shoot pool and, you know, go to the beach and find chicks and get laid, drink beer and shit like that? Or were you guys just like this dark-ass band?
Dark-ass band, but having really fun, lots of fun doing that. Like, good.
Yeah.
I mean, to us, a good time was to either break into warehouses in the flats and, you know, take little 8mm movies, or, you know, go do grave rubbings at the cemetery at 79th and Woodland, I think it was.
Sure.
I don't know. We were always taking long walks down Woodland and then back up to Shaker and hitting the junk shops and shit. So, you know, no, we did not go to the beach, but we went to any place that had decay or death. And
there's a lot of that around Shaker? I mean, come on.
No, not really. No.
I was from the east side. I was going to say, shit, man, you guys don't know decay. I mean, damn, we weren't allowed in that neighborhood.
Right. But the thing about Shaker is the edges of it are very much different than the center of it, you know?
Right.
And, like, I lived, like, 2 blocks from where Kinsman becomes Chagrin. And, you know, it was totally safe, but all I had to do was walk 2 or 3 blocks to become an instant minority and see urban blight. And, but yeah, we didn't have cars, so we didn't go a lot of places. It was always walking and a lot of hanging out in cemeteries. And the Merricks loved to drink and smoke in their basement. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, there were so many empty cans of beer and cigarette butts on the floor. They'd clean it up like 3 or 4 times a year. And as it got time for a cleaning, like, you're walking through beer cans like the same way you would a giant pile of leaves. Like you can't see the floor for the most part. You know, you have to kick shit out of the way. And so yeah, there was definitely lots of fun had, but you know, just Spike and Bane style.
So I'm going to listen. The next song we're going to listen to is Michael Landon Pukes on Your TV. Like, just talk about that one. I love that tune, by the way. That was recorded in October of '85, and it's Chris on the vocals, and he's the lyricist, and Andrew was the guitar player, right? And he wrote the music, and then you were on the bass, and Scott Pickering, out of Men Are High, was on the drums.
Yeah.
And tell me about that before we play it.
It wasn't a song we played a whole lot, but for some reason it sort of got resurrected towards the end of the band, because I think we, added a bit to it. I couldn't say exactly what, but it got longer. And Pickering was a really good fit for that song because he's, more of a groovy drummer, So he would just rock the fuck out of it. But what I remember is, for a couple weeks around the time that Andrew wrote the riff and we all learned it, was Chris Merrick being pissed off about these PSAs that Michael Landon was doing about, I don't know, some bullshit that he hated. And he's like, it's fucking bad enough that Little House on the Prairie and all this other pap and bullshit. And I have to watch this guy doing fucking PSAs during a show I actually like. And so Michael Landon Pukes on Your TV was his response to that frustration.
Well, that explains it.
I hated Michael Landon so fucking much. If he
So we just listened to Michael Landon Pukes on Your TV by Spike and Vane. And dude, I'm telling you, this song is a banger. It's like my favorite song that I heard. And I'm going to break it down like football play, right? Because I overanalyze shit. I just overanalyze shit. So the way I like about it is you've got this bass line that runs in tandem with the rhythm guitar, right? And that's just a great hook. You guys are doing the same, and you start off like on a B, C, G, A or some fucking shit. It's fucking cool chord changes. Throughout the song, you guys disengage, like two receivers. And he starts his solo, Andrew. You're thumping ass in perfect time with Scott, right? And then you start creeping up the neck, and he's riffing on his guitar. And then it sounds like, to me, he matches the bass riff on his guitar. So like it sounds like it's still your bass. And I got sort of tricked, and maybe I've got this all fucked up, but it sounds like it's still your bass, but then the bass line comes roaring back in. I'm talking about the live cut.
Yeah.
And to me, it's fucking perfect. Like, and I don't know, like I get excited about stupid shit in music because, it's just it's just when my ear hears something and I like it, I'm like, what the fuck do I like about that?
Right.
And I sit and listen to it 4 times. But yeah, that was a cool.
That struck me too when I heard it again, because I had forgotten a lot of this stuff until I was starting to try to figure out what tracks to put on here. And that ending though, man, yeah, that thing, that fucking kills. And I think at some point I'm actually playing a fifth to the root pattern. And it just, it's this crazy quilt shifting octaves, and then there's
BCG.
that harmonic. Yeah.
Who goes to fucking BCG, right?
Right.
Like,
Andrew Merrick does.
And that's brilliant, it's like nobody does that shit. Like that's just like, those are cool freaking chord changes that are not, the kind of notes in my head were like, and it was sad listening to the studio cut in a way, because the studio cut's great, and with vocals on that, oh man, it's like that would have been to me, like with Chris, if he would have been singing on that would have just gone. That's a band defining song as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know, maybe in your eyes I'm overrated, but I'm telling you, that is a band defining song. That down, 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 down. It's just got that fucking drive. Tell us about recording it and all that. I mean, was it,
I had forgotten we even recorded it, because I think it was one of the things we did for Basic Tracks and never finished it, like Chris didn't even record vocals for it. So I had thought I'd gone through all my tapes, and just 2 or 3 months ago that was on some other tape of like some Prison Shake rehearsal or something. It was weird. I don't know how it wound up on there, but I think early on, after we listened to those Basic Tracks, we thought, well, this is just, this is a really old Basic song, and it's so different from everything else we recorded. Like, let's just let this one be. I don't think anybody in the band, other than maybe Scott, saw the value in it at the time.
But men are shit.
Listening to it now, especially that live version, it's like, wow, that really kills.
It does. And it's I read your note. It said it was like the last song of the second to last show, which is kind of an obscure reference. Like, I've played hundreds and hundreds of shows. I don't remember one last song or first song I've ever played in any show. I can tell you that.
If I didn't have the tape, I wouldn't have remembered.
Yeah, because who remembers that shit? That's cool. Yeah. But I don't know. So the next song we're going to listen to is called Love Isn't Hollow, and that was recorded in the spring of '81, and that's kind of unique. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that one, Robert, before we cut it?
Okay. So that's the only recording of the original band from before the time I joined. And at that time, Bruce, who was later the drummer, mostly played guitar or bass. And nearly all their songs were, some vague, jammy lifting of some song they all liked. So in the case of Love Isn't Hollow, I think their starting point was the Modern Lovers' Pablo Picasso. Right? But then they put their own shit on top of it. And a lot of those songs from that period are like that. EKG comes from them. And we continued to play it even after the lineup changes. Dog Sleds in Heaven was a really old song that nobody liked, but I had an old tape. And I'm like, oh, we should do this song. And everybody, Chris and Andrew were like, no, fuck that song. But I persisted, and we did it. There were a few others I wish we had kept doing. Like, there was one Andrew sang called Long Live the Ice Age, with the parenthetical title Calling Yog-Sothoth, the Lovecraft beast god. And, or Don't Look at Me Like That, I'm Fucking Paranoid, You Jerk, was the whole title of the song. Or Ich bin krank, I'm sick. He was one of the classes we had together was German, and so he thought it would be fun to sing a song in German. But if you were a German speaker and you read the lyrics, you'd be like, "This doesn't say what you think it says."
I can't imagine. I don't know.
It was, yeah, I won't go into that. But yeah, it's really cool that wound up on the original tape and therefore survived to the present day. I don't know where the rest of that tape is. It wasn't one I had. I just dubbed it. And when we put out the cassette, I insisted we put it on there. And Chris really didn't want it on there and said that he didn't want his name associated with it. So on the tape release, we made up some fake bluesman name for him or something. But it's obviously us. But the amazing thing is, a lot of people will comment about Bruce's drumming and how accomplished it is, and especially in the context of a punk band. But he was actually just as good at guitar and bass and vibraphone. And yeah, that guitar solo, to this day, is one of my top 5 ever by anybody. That solo just kills me, man. And then he was happy to just be our drummer, even though he could play better than the rest of us combined.
Was he really that good?
He was.
Because you guys were black belts. You guys were good. I don't know.
Yeah, but we were kind of sloppy sometimes. I mean, technique-wise, we didn't have a whole lot going. Well, we always challenged ourselves. And sometimes, especially Andrew would sometimes write songs that he couldn't play, and Chris would often get lost. That's a whole nother topic. But that's more about his mental state than his musicianship. Yeah. So whereas Bruce could, listen to something once and know how to play it, the rest of us were never interested in learning anybody's songs or learning music theory or whatever. But he had training from a young age, and being a loner, practiced a lot, got really good. Plus, he's a huge King Crimson fan, so if he's out to learn something, it's some shit that's way out in the stratosphere beyond anything the rest of us would even consider.
Oh, that's interesting you say it, because to me that whole solo was really frippy light. The second solo.
Yeah.
The first solo is kind of straight ahead, and then the second solo was just kind of frippy light, something, you'd hear in a flick where 3 guys in Vietnam are standing behind a sandbag smoking weed or some shit. It was just one of them fucking hippie kind of fucking solos, And did you and Bruce ever get, I don't know if this is a bad question, but did you ever get frustrated that you weren't playing guitars or I don't know. I mean, because you're a really accomplished guitar player, Robert. Were you that good then, or did you get a lot better through the mid '80s? I mean, you always get better, but
yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I listen to old stuff that I did on guitar and I'm impressed by it, and then other times I listen to other things. I'm like, yeah, that's nothing special. But yeah, it's just weird. The mix of songs that are on the original songs from the tape, there aren't very many that I play guitar on. There are more that I sing on. Right. But on the first album, everything is almost completely equal. We all sing about the same number of songs, play bass, play guitar. And then the second album, I play an inordinate number of songs on guitar. So it's more just sort of a, I don't know, happenstance, coincidence. The stars aligned for me to not play very much guitar on those songs. But I never felt like it was fun for me to play bass because that was different. And singing was fun in a live context because I could go wherever I wanted. I wasn't plugged into anything. And my chords are pretty long, so... Yeah. No, I never really felt like, I want to do more of this or less of that. I was happy with whatever because it was just a, constant creative thing happening within our little tiny universe.
Yeah. I know it's a dumb follow-up, but did you play with a pick, or were you a finger player, thumb player?
Pick only.
Yeah. It sounded like it. Most guitarists do.
Yeah. Andrew, later on, when he was playing bass, he started really focusing on the bass probably the last year we were together. He was even writing a lot of his songs on bass. And he went to a, pickless, thumping,
right,
finger slapping deal.
Right. Yeah, I was one of those guitar players that never wanted to. I figured out at 12 years old that bass players never get laid, so I was like, "Fuck this! I'm going to play guitar." So I never had to figure out how to do it. Anyway, so let's listen to "Love Isn't Hollow" by Spike in Vain. So we just heard "Love Isn't Hollow" by Spike and Vane, and that was the only surviving track of the original band, and it had Bruce Allen playing guitar, the drummer of the band, actually. So now the last song I'm going to preview is called Swamp Baby Blues, and that was recorded in the winter of 1985 at Britain Square Sound by Jim DeMane, was it? And Robert, you wrote the music and you sang the song. Okay. Give me the...
I just play guitar on that. I came up with the riff, and Andrew came up with the lyrics and sings.
Excellent. And Scott's on the drums on this one, too.
Yeah, it's an outtake from the second album, Death Drives a Cat.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to listen to Swamp Baby Blues by Spike and Vane.
I came from the bayou, 'cause my baby left me. She left me for a preacher, dressed in a blue suit. Oh, he took her singing and dancing in the bad part of town. And he took her to the hip bars where the music was oh so loud. And I think, oh, I'm so blue. My baby left me for a preacher dressed in a blue suit. He the man with the Bible in his hand. He say, stay holier than thou. But we fucked my baby in his own white bed. So I packed up my things and I boarded a train and I came to the industrial Midwest to work over a machine. And I said, oh, I'm so blue. My baby left me for a preacher dressed in a blue suit. And I said, oh, I'm so blue. My baby left me for a preacher dressed in a blue suit. I work for $30 a day, making useless metal things on a lathe. And I go home and drink a six-pack, 'cause I see nothing in the future except for my old armchair. A black and white TV set is my only friend here. And I sing, oh, I'm so blue. My baby left me for a preacher dressed in a blue suit.
So that was Swamp Baby Blues by Spike and Vane. And man, I'm telling you, that cuts a gem. It's great production. It's great axe slinging. What's the story behind the song? All this blues stuff all of a sudden. I hear a little bit of your future in that song.
Sure.
You know, of bands that came, your Prison Shake, more or less. But what was the story behind that?
Around that time, Chris and I were both really starting to get into, pre-war blues, basically, because, and we're particularly fond of the guys like Big Bill Broomsey or even to a lesser extent, Robert Johnson, where, yeah, it's this typical blues 1-4-5 pattern, but sometimes the vocals don't really line up with the changes, and that, the blue note, that flatted fifth, was something that we used all the time. Previous to that, not trying to play anything traditional. But after, a year and a half of playing all this really chromatic stuff, it started to become more interesting and challenging to do something more in a traditional space, but still with bringing in what we had done so far. So in a lot of ways, that flatted fifth, like a B flat if you're in E, and that's what that song does. It just, that B flat just keeps happening no matter what the chord is. I don't know. We just thought, well, fuck, why can't we do that? And so we came up with a few songs that were like that.
Excellent.
But honestly, that particular one, Swamp Baby Blues, is probably my least favorite song the band ever did.
Well, it's just different, right? On
So
the record, so it's
yeah.
like if you were, seriously, if someone was going to give you traditional airplay, that would be the first one they grabbed. I mean, traditional airplay. I'm not saying that's the best thing in the world, but I'm just saying that's like the most mainstream of all the songs you did, and it still had a little edge to it. But I thought the production was good, and I always love your guitar, or the guitar playing. I thought was cool. I just like it. And like I said, I can hear, it led me to think of, did anything in Spike and Vane? Did you take anything from that band into? I don't know what Prison Shake, and here's the pup. Anything? Was there anything other than Prison Shake? He's to your over your. I don't know which side you are on that. I'm not sure. If the cameras, right, he's over. Yeah. You're right on my left, but at any rate, did you take anything into Prison Shake from Spike and Vane, or was that just a fresh start? Because that song, was like I could hear Ankler singing that song too.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. There was a lot actually. Because like I said, we wrote a lot of songs, and especially songs that we came up with in the last, 4 or 5 months of the band that never got recorded. My attitude was like, well, I came up with that riff. That's a damn good riff. I'm going to repurpose it somehow. So there were entire songs, like By the Side of the Road was a song that I think I had started to show to Spike and Vane just before we broke up. That extended version of Opus has a couple riffs that I later, or at least one that became part of, what's the song called? She Talks Trouble. So yeah, there's actually a ton of stuff that got repurposed in Prison Shake, but nobody knew because they were never recorded, So yeah, it was pretty much a straight trajectory for me. Like pretty much anything that Prison Shake put out in the first 2 or 3 years, like if Spike and Vane had never been broken up, they would have been Spike and Vane songs. I was just continuing to write the kind of shit I write.
Right.
But I was, like I alluded to before, I was already adept at the noise thing, so it started to become more interesting and challenging to me to like, well, can I write a ballad? Can I just write a straight up ballad? Of course it didn't come out straight up. I'm talking about our first single, Fairfield Avenue Serenade, but so for a while I was kind of focused on that, but still, my writing process is always just sort of, that typical conduit thing. I pick up the guitar and shit comes out, and it doesn't always all fit with each other. So it wasn't, just that sort of trying to do more traditional stuff. It's also just, learning the instrument more thoroughly. Like, well, how do these chords go together, It's sort of I look at all those songs as sort of a scrapbook of my learning process.
Well, it's a great job. Is there anything left that you want to mention about the release? But, if not, if any songs that I missed you want to maybe highlight or recordings. And, again, remind us all about the details of the release one more time.
Sure. Double album available on black vinyl. Also brown. And those can be found in stores. And there's also the puke mix. That's what the pressing plant calls it. That's sort of puke-looking vinyl, and that you can only get direct from me and the label. There are just 200 of those. Out January 20th, if I didn't say that. Distributed by Revolver, who I've been with forever, and they're fucking great. Yeah, that's it. The only other track I would point out is Winter's Black Hand, because it very well may be the most insane, intense track we ever did. And I like the fact that, it's easy to construct a narrative of, okay, first album, crazy, weird, diverse post-hardcore evil shit. Second album, more rootsy. But, you know, records are snapshots. And Winter's Black Hand was recorded for that album that just had the track you played, you know, Swamp Baby Blues. So at the same time, we're experimenting with, you know, how do we incorporate this older evil genre into our music? We're still doing this fucking insane, aggressive, terrifying shit. And just hearing that track again after 20 years just really kind of, I don't know, if I were a fan, I'd be all about it. Like, whoa, this song exists. There's something crazier than Children in the Subway. It may not be better, but it's crazier.
Well, here's the deal. I'm going to I'll end the interview with Winter's Black Hand.
Right on.
And that will take us out. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for your time, Robert.
Thank you.
I can't
Mark.
wait to do it again. I'd really would love to do a prison shake conversation with you someday.
That'd be
and
fun.
maybe get Pickering and Ink on there.
And
even do something.
If you want to have a good time and a 2-hour-long show that's nothing but jokes, yeah, get Enkler and Pickering on here.
It'd be awesome.
God.
That would be the podcast dream for ClePunk. We'd love to do that. Yeah. So we'll effort that. But and it'd be good to do one about Scat Records as well, because you've done a lot for the for not only the local scene but the national scene. But again, thanks for your time, Robert.
Right on.
We do appreciate it, and you have a great
Mark.
day, brother.
For sure.
Be well.
Rock on.